Hey, welcome to NunPub 3. My name is Daryl Andrews, and I'm here with five wonderful, experienced, wise developers, and we're going to be talking about the developer's role. They also wear many hats. I know that many of them have designed games and done production, all kinds of things, and I'm sure they'll get into some of the different services they can provide. But before we jump into the topic of developer's role, I'm going to make them each introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about themselves, where they are in the world, and what they do. I'm going to start with Jesse.
Hi, so I'm Jesse, Jesse Wright, I guess. I'm currently in the Northwest Territories in Canada, so it is summer here, which means it's a balmy 12 degrees Celsius. As for my role in the industry, I have been designing games for coming up to 8 or 9 years now. First game was Legend of Korra Pro Bending Arena, thanks to, in fact, this lovely gentleman in the corner here, Nate Murray. That's our first serious industry connection. Since then, I've designed almost 10 games or so, mostly working with different intellectual properties, Batman, Dragon Ball, Kingdom Rush, and I also have ended up doing a bunch of development work, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So,
awesome. Thanks, Jesse. Next, Carla.
I'm Carla Kopp. I'm a designer, developer, publisher. I run Weird Draft Games, Galactic Raptor Games. I also do a lot of contracting work. The majority of it is like solo and development, but I also do contract design, which is super fun. And you can find me on the web at weirddraftgames.com/Carla.
Wonderful. Nate.
I'm Nate C. Murray. I'm in San Diego, California. I have been a product manager, developer, and designer, probably best known for work at IDW, as well as being the head developer on Monstrosity, that you all should buy. I'm currently the game development manager for Cut.com as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Brenna.
Hey, I'm Brenna. I'm down here in Melbourne, Australia. I'm the president and co-founder of Quillsilver Studio, which is a board game creative studio offering not just game development, but a bunch of services, including Kickstarter, marketing, production, illustration, basically the whole gamut.
Awesome. And last but not least, Jess.
I'm Jess Cassidy, and I run Cassidy Consulting, also doing Kickstarters and international marketing direction. But I've done a lot in this industry, from helping everything that a small publisher needs to know and do. And that includes developing a few games and co-developing a few games.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, I mean, I'm sure as we go on, we'll get to hear more and more about the different projects and services you do, but let's just jump into this, and I'm going to put Carla on the spot here to start us off as we kind of set the stage. Let's define what's the difference between the designer and the developer. What is a developer? Lots of people don't even know developers are the unsung heroes, I think, in some degree. So, Carla, tell us a little bit about that, and then if someone else wants to follow up, just kind of we can set the stage. Let's define things. So, Carla, start us off.
Okay, so for me, design is the creating of an idea, and then development is taking that idea and making it into more of a product. It's like looking at that idea from every different aspect and making it perfect for that specific publisher, their intended audience, and also having manufacturing in mind at the same time.
Awesome. And again, putting you on the spot, Brenna, do you want to jump in and add to that?
Yeah, so to me, development is really about refinement, whether that's like the mechanics, the theme, the overall like gameplay experience, like kind of the ineffable things about the game. So like if design is kind of the core idea, then development is like the refinement of that idea.
Awesome. Let's hear. Sorry, we have our wonderful tech in the background asking something. It'll be worked on. Meanwhile, let's keep going. I'm curious, for each of you, I mean, you've worked on a variety of different games. I'm curious, what was your first development experience like? I'm going to put Jesse on the spot here. But tell us a little bit about, the first time you kind of worked on a development or one of the first things. How did it go? What was it like? Let's start with our rookie experiences, not all our, experience yet.
Right.
Tell us about that.
Have I muted myself?
You're good.
Okay, cool, great. Sorry, it's a bad habit of mine. Yeah, so my first solo development experience, I don't actually think it's even come out yet, but it was a little card game called Moods of the Mad King that Alan Barr had designed and kickstarted years ago. And he just wanted it sort of reconfigured and reapproached from my perspective, because he was looking at re-releasing it. And it was a really interesting experience because the game had a lot of great ideas in it. But the execution on those ideas was a bit inconsistent with the target experience that the creator had for it. And so it was this very interesting and somewhat at the time tense process in which I kind of transformed the game in a way that looked on paper like it was totally different than the original design. Like it wasn't like I went in and rebalanced some stuff. Like I have the rule book and changed the core flow of the game. So I was very nervous about all of that. But in the end, like Alan got a look at the game and it was closer to his original intent. Like that experience that he was trying to create at the table with that first design was realized by the refined version. I like that phrase, Brenna, of the game that I had created. So it ultimately went very well, but it was certainly super nerve-wracking when I was in the middle of it because I was hitting these points where I was like, oh God, is it my place to be making these changes even? So
Absolutely. And Nate, why don't you share a little bit about your first experience?
Yeah, for my first experience, I was thrown into the fire. I did the development for IDW's first big box game, which was Kill Shakespeare. And that was something I definitely, I agree with Jesse. I don't feel qualified to have made the choices I was making. The weight of that game was, BGG wise, probably like a 3.5. These are the designers who made Yedo, which was one of my favorite games. So there was a lot of intimidation there as well. When you start becoming a peer of people you idolize, there's a lot of internal work you need to do on your imposter syndrome and all those kinds of things. And so the nice thing is once I was done with that game, which I apologize if you bought it because it did not, it's all the developer's fault. But once I was done with that, there was nothing that could really shake me. So sometimes you got to take some lumps.
You got hooked. So we've mentioned a few projects, and I'm curious, what are some of the companies and designers you've worked with? Who are some of the people that you've a little humble brag here, like who are some of the credentials for each of us? We'll start with Jess, and we'll go opposite order how we introduced ourselves. But mention a few of the companies, give a little context about the projects you're working on or have worked on.
So I started with Artana Games and did just a little bit of everything with them, and then got my first solo development project with Lovelace and Babbage through them, and that was a Scott Alms game, which was amazing because he's an incredible designer to work with, just really, really flexible. And that input that Jesse's talking about, I didn't feel qualified either to be making some of these decisions, but Scott was super empowering and really just helped me feel like I was on the right track with things. So that was a great first solo development project. And now I'm working on stuff with Ion Game Design and Ape Games as well, and a few projects with Mighty Boards.
Awesome. Brenna?
Yeah, so I started out with Starling Games. So the first game that I developed professionally was Everdell. Since then, I've worked with a bunch of other publishers like Arcane Wonders, Thunderworks Games, got to work on the Role Player line, which was really cool. Everything Epic Games, Nighthawk Interactive, Underdog Games. Can't talk about everything yet.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
This is part of the nature of things. So some projects people will know, and some things we'll just have to say respectfully we can't talk about. Nate, what about yourself? You mentioned you started with Kill Shakespeare. What are some other projects and companies you've worked with?
I was trying to think, and I wish there was a list I could pull up, but I did a lot of work, obviously, with IDW, Pandasaurus. I've done some work with Deepwater. I think I've worked with almost all the Canadian Artisan Guild, or at least a lot of you guys or y'all that are published on. Daryl, Jesse, Sen, Adam Wise, Stephen Sauer, Eric Lang, and other big names. Kevin Wilson and I have done a lot of work together. Rob Davao was someone I was lucky to work with. So it's been a treat.
Awesome. Carla?
Oh, and Eric's awesome. I need to shout him out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Be in the chat yelling at me.
Okay, so for me, I've worked with Subsurface Games, Ninth Level Games. I really enjoyed working with Geeks Who Drink. They're not a game company, but
Hey,
yeah.
that sounds fun.
Yeah, I mean, it was very different than the normal thing I do, but it was great. Letterman Games, I've also worked with some amazing designers like Ian Zhang, Stephen Armini, and Eric Slauson.
Wonderful, wonderful. Eric's getting lots of praise on this one because he's very talented. All right, Jesse.
Yeah, so most of the development work I've done has been for really small companies that haven't launched their Kickstarters yet for various reasons related to COVID. But I can name a couple of publishers that would be more recognizable. I'm working with Deepwater Games and Van Ryder Games, and I can't say anything more than that for either of those. I am part of the development team for Skybound's Bloodstone. Which was briefly on Kickstarter in February and has gone back into development. I also was part of the dev team for, it's now called Solani, which is Final Frontier Games product. So yeah, that's a couple of things.
Amazing, amazing. And we have some wonderful viewers that are starting to send in some questions and comments. So thank you for joining us, Jay Bell. We are going to get into that question. So thank you for asking that, and we'll definitely go there soon. But before we do, again, I'm going to pass this question to Carla to start us off. But, you know, we're talking about development, and one of the main questions is, like, what are you trying to solve as a developer? What are some of the things that maybe a developer can manipulate or change or test? Or, you know, what are you looking at when you're looking at a game?
So one aspect I always look for is like making the game more accessible and lowering the cognitive load, because there's like a ton of ways you can lower the cognitive load just to make the game like focus more on the fun. But a big part of it is finding things to cut, because usually like a game has like so many parts that just don't need to be there, and finding out which parts like deliver like the most amount of fun and like focusing on that and cutting out the rest is like one of the first things I try to do, because extra stuff is just extra cost, extra cognitive load, just extra focus that you don't need. But you can also do things to make the game more thematic or change the theme to fit like the mechanics and stuff a lot better. And like whenever you change the theme, there's like a whole host of things that can now change to make the game thematic in that point of view. But like graphic design, changing components can do like a wonder just to make things so much better. So that's just a couple things.
Yeah, no, these are great. And Jess, why don't you jump on that? What else?
I agree with that so much. It's really about the experience for me when I'm developing. I do a lot of play testing, a lot of watching how people are responding to the game as it is, and then trying to ensure that those moments where they're having fun continue throughout the game and they're not getting overloaded by tangents that maybe a designer thought, hey, this is a great mechanism and that would go with this mechanism, and then let's add this mechanism, and it's just so much that people are getting overloaded and no longer really having fun. They're starting to struggle. So seeing that in playtesting and kind of paring that down, I think is a huge thing for a developer. But also, having started on the publisher side, I look at things from a component level of how much is this game going to cost? Because if you don't look at where your target audience is and who's going to be buying this game, you can kind of miss the mark for people buying it, right? If you're creating an $80 game that really should only be a $25 game, no one's going to buy that. They're going to see that experience and say, that's really not worth it for me. So there's also a piece of marketing I think the developer needs to consider when they're doing that development of who is this target audience? What does this experience need to do for these folks? And then how much are they going to be willing to pay for that experience? So maybe how many fiddly bits do we need to pull out?
Sure. Lots of good questions here. I know, Brenna, you have more on this front to add. Why don't you give some other questions? What are some of the other things you're trying to tackle when you're doing development?
Great points from Carla and Jess, definitely. I mean, when it comes to development, like there's additive and subtractive development. I find a lot of the time, especially working with first-time designers, it tends to be a lot of like subtractive development, you're cutting out a lot because they tend to like over design a little bit. When you're working with a more experienced designer, that doesn't tend to be such an issue. And then some games, if you're working on a big campaign game and you have to write like tons of missions and, legacy style stuff, you're doing a lot of like content generation where you're adding more to the game. So it really just kind of depends on the project. And I totally agree with what Jess said. I think marketing kind of begins at design, basically. Like, it's not worth it to design something that's not marketable from a product perspective. So that's definitely something that I try to carry through throughout the development cycle as well, keeping in mind, like, how is this product actually going to look, on a Kickstarter page, on the shelf, on the table. All those things go into it.
Yeah, I think actually everyone on this panel is really good at that and very talented at thinking about end product and how to, really care about the whole process. And so I'm going to put you a little on the spot to self-brag a little here. Nate, can you share what makes you a good developer?
I'm really enjoying this panel. I think the answers I'm hearing are so great that it feels funny talking, because I could just sit and listen to Carla, basically, because she's saying stuff that I would want to say. I really do think it's experienced, and I think that, there's something to having your 10,000 hours in this space, and knowing what you're competing against and what other games are out there and killing it at certain price points, and what you're bringing into that space. You need to know what party games are out there at $30 and what's in the box and all those kinds of things. So you really just need to be grinding and working nonstop. And then as far as self-brags, I do want to throw out that while Molly and Nathan are amazing rock stars at Pandasaurus and have done all the work to make that brand huge, I am the reason why Machipura have one green die and one blue die. So sometimes product development is that small that you just look for those little cutesy flares. There's the hard work early, and then there's that hard work late where you're just looking for those little tiny pops to really make a theme sing through or anything like that.
Awesome. Love it. Again, I'm going to put Jesse on the spot here, too. You are each very talented. Jesse, what makes you a good developer? Oh, you're muted, I believe.
See? I told you. You
told us, and we just didn't get to hear it.
Yeah, I do that. I mute myself, and then don't see the little icon. Yeah, so I think that my biggest strength in development is experience refinements. So I focus a lot on adjusting the game to really emphasize a certain core experience that the designers are going for and that the publisher is hoping for. And one of the ways that comes out, I think, the most powerfully is when I get my hands on something that's supposed to be asymmetric. And so that is either different characters in a game, or, as Brenna was talking about, campaign games that have different scenarios. It is essential to me, like borderline partly an obsession, that I need to make these things feel different. It's not enough to have like 10 scenarios. I want players to sit down and feel like scenario 2 and scenario 3 were different, like qualitatively different experiences. And so that's what I try to bring to all of my development projects. And I eagerly seek out stuff that lets me do that, because it is so fun.
Yeah, no, this is very true of you. You are a very clever designer, I've always said. And so applying that to development, I think, just will make any project a lot better. Now, I mean, we're talking about the good sides, the strengths, the positives, but obviously we have some horror stories as well, some examples we've seen, or even ourselves, where we've been part of seeing, what not to do, what are some mistakes or fumbles. I'm going to put Brenna on the spot. Do you have any stories along those lines of just room for improvement?
I wouldn't say like horror stories. There's definitely a couple things that like I personally try to be on guard for. The first one is projects. I'm a big believer that like somebody really needs to own a project and have like a guiding vision for it. Because if you don't have that in development, things can really get muddied and you end up way farther afield than you intended. So whether that it's the developer themselves or like a producer or the designer or project manager, whoever it is, like somebody needs to kind of own that and have a vision for it and really execute that. And second, I throughout development, I'm just always repeating to myself, like, where's the fun? And I find that if I get like a little bit too micro into games, a little bit like too focused on the mechanics or something, I start losing the fun. and like the mechanics may sing really well, but it's, you know, not a particularly fun game to play. So that's something that I personally always try to be really conscious of.
Absolutely. Jess, do you have any examples?
So I can talk about kind of during the process mistakes I've made. One of the most embarrassing to me was I had a game where it was playing well at 3 and 4 players. We had a great solo mode, but I really wanted 2 players to be a better experience for this game. So I started to kind of hyper focus on developing for 2-player. And this was actually right before a convention where I was going to be showing off the game and play testing, and had people sign up to see the game, all of this, which is right there, mistake number 1. Maybe don't make some huge significant changes right before you're about to meet with a bunch of people to show off the game. So I did that, and the changes I made really did great at a 2-player experience. It made the game sing. It was beautiful. It was wonderful. And I sat down to play this newly, blinged out game with some folks at a 4-player count, and it died. It died like a couple turns in. So bad. And I was so embarrassed, but they were super nice. We had to pull it back, bring things back out. They didn't have time because it was like an hour-long slot that we had this room. So we had to reschedule, do all of this. So embarrassing for me, they were super sweet. They didn't mind that they got to kind of see this development process and what I'd done, and then what I brought it back to, bringing it back a level. But yeah, those would be 2 mistakes I'd advise people to try to avoid. Don't switch things up before you're going to be doing a huge outreach to people in the community, and be careful not to hyper focus on a player count without really considering what the ramifications are throughout the game.
Yeah, good advice there. All right, well, let's change gears a little bit and get into one question I hear often comes up, especially when people are trying to get into development, is how do you figure out how much time something's going to take? How do you set some goals and set some expectations on a project? Let's go to Carla. Do you want to start us off on the discussion of just like, how do you figure that out?
So I have like 3 major things to look at. The first is really easy, like how long does the publisher say the game takes to play? Like a half-an-hour game is going to take like less than half the time to develop than an hour game, probably, just because it's harder to get playtesters to play for an hour. More things can go wrong in the hour, etc. So that starts with where I think like how long it'll take to develop. And then I look at the rule book and like maybe the print and play or cards and everything. And if you can kind of like see a rule book and see like how much a designer like how good they are by their rule book a little, like if the rule book is really clear and concise and easy to read and I just understand everything, the process is going to be so much simpler than like if I read the rule book and my first instinct is to read it again, because I just don't understand what's going on. And like also looking at the cards to seeing like how defined everything is, like how understandable and easy, just to like see how things interact without like first playing it. And then finally just talking with the publisher. I really enjoy when the publishers like just let me go and do what I want, and I get to just change all the things that I think needs to be changed. But some publishers, like, they have their babies, they want to be like hands-on, they want to meet every week. The more hands-on the publisher needs to be, the longer it's going to take. Normally just because there's a lot of back and forth and we try different things and we end up going back to the first thing I suggested anyway, but we have to like try lots more things. And like if a publisher is new and they just don't, like if they've never worked with a developer before and they're not clear about things, like if I've found that some publishers, like, they don't want certain things changed, but if they don't tell me that up front, I don't know that, so I'll go down a certain path. And the newer a publisher is, the longer it'll take, just because of all these things that we're learning about, and just finding out, like, maybe the publisher doesn't know that like a certain section of the game is their baby that cannot change. So learning those lessons together takes some time.
Absolutely. Great stuff here. Let's keep it going. Jesse, do you want to talk a little bit about, how do you figure out like a quote for someone? Someone comes your way, asks you to work on a game. How are you going to figure out how much time it's going to take? How are you going to get, compensated for that?
Yeah, great question. So at base level compensation, currently I work on hourly rates. So I don't quote like a big flat rate for a project, mostly because I've burned myself too many times, misjudging how long a project is going to take for all of the reasons Carla just outlined, actually. So at present, I give hourly rates, and I do give estimates about how many hours I think it's going to take to meet the publisher's deadlines. My actual rate is determined by how much time the publisher is allowing. If there's a Kickstarter deadline or a publication deadline that's really tight, it's a premium to like shift my focus and make that project my primary attention. That all said, when a publisher first approaches me, I do have a single flat rate service, which is a project assessment. It basically covers 10 to 12 hours of my time, but I charge a flat rate for it for every project, and exactly like where that time goes will depend on the details of the project. And it has a concrete deliverable of a development sort of outline. So that way a client can come to me. I have a nice clean flat rate that has clean hourly sort of built into it. So I know that I'm not going to incidentally get taken advantage of because I misquoted. And then I can present them a sort of clear deliverable that's valuable to them, whether or not they take me on as a developer, because I've given them this detailed analysis of the game and what I think needs to be done. And from there, we can have an even-keeled conversation about what the development timeline will look like, what rates make sense, and what kind of an hourly budget makes sense, and how that might get divided up. So
that makes sense. I love it. I know Quillsilver offers a lot of different services, but Brenna, could you talk a little bit about how you go about kind of like giving an idea of what a project's going to take, and how do you figure that out?
Yeah, definitely. So again, great points from Carla and Jesse for sure. Like Jesse, I also do like an initial assessment period of the game that is, mostly a flat rate. Some games will go a little bit outside that, but generally like the same kind of ballpark rate, just to play the game and get a feel for it and really assess like how much work it's going to need. I'm kind of like a project management nerd, and I like obsessively track my time. So I have like years of data that tells me how long it takes me to do things. So that's really useful for quoting projects, because, if I get a mid-weight kind of Euro game, then I can like look back in my history and be like, okay, well, how long did it take me to do this game that's kind of a similar weight? And I can use that to quote it out. And as Carla said, there might be other factors that influence that, like more publisher involvement. Like if they want to have like bi-weekly meetings or something, then like that's going to impact the timeline for sure. So those are all things you have to take into account. But for me, like I really recommend like time tracking to people who freelance. I just think it's so valuable, and it helps you, it takes a while to build up that data set, but like once you have it in the future, it just makes things a lot easier, I think.
Absolutely. No, this is really helpful advice. I hope people that are watching that are either live or watching later, you should take some notes, because this is really helpful information on if you're interested in getting into development. Talking about that, I'll get Nate to start us off, but where and how do you find development opportunities? Like if you want to get into this, any tips, any suggestions? What was your experience?
Yeah, so I mean, if you want to I guess there's two different parts. If you want to get into this versus if you want to continue working successfully in this, the continuing is easier, because once people know you and once people know how you work, there's so many different things that need to be done in the tabletop industry, and there's so many hats that you end up wearing that like just showing up to things like this, I already know that I'm going to follow up with Brenna after this and just go, okay, that was a smart human being who had a lot of things that seemed useful to me. And so that's just kind of how it works once you're in. To get in, if I was to do this all over again, I would knock down doors and do free work. And I think that there's a good example of that in how much playtesting is needed in the industry. So how much volunteer space is needed at conventions. And I know several people who've started their careers that way. I know Ian Zhang started by doing booth running for me and doing follow-up and playtesting. Tony Miller, same story. Pete Walsh, who stepped in and did the fan management for the IDW TMNT series. You put in that work and you show that you're reliable, and the opportunities come to you. But this isn't an industry where a resume is going to do much for you, because who cares about a resume? I need to see like actionable things you were good at, because this is such a weird creative space, and all the schooling in the world doesn't matter if you don't have that spark. So you just have to get out there and do things. Find a friend that needs help organizing their rules, and do all those things and keep doing them. And eventually you do hit that tipping point where instead of outbound hunting, the work becomes an inbound thing that comes to you.
Yeah, really good stuff. I know Jess has been to a million conventions, and I was curious if you could talk a little bit about how, conventions are coming back in some digital ways as well. Could you talk about conventions and other ways, again, where you could find development opportunities?
Well, Nate said it really well, and I can only just echo that. No job should be beneath you, I feel. In every industry that I have been in, the way that I have gotten into that industry and then truly excelled very quickly in it is by taking on whatever is needed and not feeling like, oh, but my resume says that I should be at this position. I started in this industry by volunteering to attend conventions, showing up and following the rules, reading everything the publisher gave me for how I should behave in, their booth and what they needed to help, and just showing up, seeing where there was a need and filling that need. And that gets noticed. And then I got job after job after job because I was showing up and helping people and volunteering. As tired as I was going to, I think the first year, 40 conventions in 1 year, it was fun to help others. And that help made them eventually be like, oh, you're doing that now? I want to hire you for that. Because they knew I was reliable and they saw the spark that Nate is talking about. So I wouldn't advise going to 40 conventions in a year. I was pretty dang exhausted by the end of it, but I sure as heck made a lot of contacts and friends throughout that made it a lot easier to get the jobs in the industry. And for Lovelace and Babbage to be sought out by the designer to say, what company are you with now? I want you to take this game. So
awesome. Yeah, absolutely. And kind of going along the same line, but kind of reversing it. Carly, can you answer the question of like, when should someone be looking for a developer? What, if someone's watching that doesn't want to be a developer, they need help, when should they get a developer involved?
So it depends on if you're a designer or a publisher. If you're a publisher, honestly, any time is a good time for a developer. You can ask developers to do a variety of things. You can, if you're at the very end of a project and you're like, I'm pretty sure this is done, but let's just have somebody else give their opinion and some final thoughts, you can hire a developer for only a few hours. Or you can hire a developer as soon as you sign a game, just to take it over and go and make it more into that publisher's type of game. As a designer, you might want to get a publisher, if you are pitching the game and not getting really anyone looking at it, just to make the game a little bit better, to pop a little more, something like that. So I don't think there's a wrong time to ever get a developer unless you absolutely don't know the direction that you want to go in. But even then, you can ask a developer, hey, what would you do with this game? If I don't know the audience, what should the audience be? And they can help you try to make, a more marketable game.
Oh, you're muted.
Yes. Oh, I'm so good at that. Just to echo and reinforce what Carla is saying, I think the right time to at least start reaching out to developers is when you need help. When you can identify that you need help with something, and then you can reach out to a developer and see if they can help you, and if the help that they can provide you is in line with what you can afford and what makes sense for the position you're at with your game. For designers, it's more challenging. I would caution designers too much about investing in development before you've got a product signed. But I think as Carla has said and Nate has said, developers can wear lots of hats. We often end up doing lots of different kinds of things for projects. It's not necessarily a clean role, which means there's not necessarily a clean moment in the publishing process where it's most appropriate to consult the developer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, one of the first ways that I got to know Nate was actually through licenses, and my fun opportunity, shout out, where I got to connect with Nate was on Back to the Future with IDW, and it was a real privilege and a real highlight to get to work on IP. And lots of people ever since then have always asked me, how did you get to do that? But even like, what is it like working with like these cool licenses and IPs and things that already have a world? And so, Nate, you want to talk a little bit about what that process is like, the pros and cons of like working with a license and specifically developing and with all the rules and approvals and that whole process?
Sure. The pros of working on a license is you get to play with something you love. You get to play with the coolest thing in the world. The negative is everything else, right? Like that's it. So, when it comes to, I could go 40 minutes on this, but when it
feel
comes
free to go a few minutes on it. I'm sure lots of people are curious. So
sure. So, when it comes to license work, the biggest thing you need to do is understand that you are a shepherd of that license from one medium to another. And it's not about you, and it's not about your ego, and it's not about your new ideas for the IP. This is not fan fiction. There's a place for that, and that's great. But this is correctly pulling through the best moments of that IP that people care about and putting it into a game. So for, Daryl brought up Back to the Future. We were powering up a DeLorean and gunning into 88. I mean, you need to speak that shorthand language. I was a design and developer on the first Godfather card game. And for me, it was I don't get to mess with these characters. I don't get to do anything. I get to deliver a Mafia game that has a wake-up phase where someone wakes up with a horse head in front of them. That is important because that is obvious. Like, you got to play the hits sometimes. You don't go to the deep tracks as your base thing. You play those hits. I brought in Jesse to do Legend of Korra, which was a real big trust in Jesse because I didn't watch any Legend of Korra. So the biggest thing for me was to go hire someone who watched that. I do think when you work in the license space, it's important to know that your clientele and the licensors, the people who control a Back to the Future, a Legend of Korra, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, these are not board game designers. These are people who are allowing board game designers to play with their world. So the way you speak to a licensor is going to be different than speaking to our peers in the board game space. These people, I've had to educate licensors constantly on how games work and how things go, because that's not what they understand. They understand, kind of the vision of these characters and how they exist. They don't know the mechanics of roll and move or asymmetric or anything like that. So you're going to have to do a lot of repeated answering of what you're doing on every step if you want to be working with licensors. They have to continue to trust you. They are playing a game that has many more zeros on the end of their revenue than board games does. So when I talk to Viacom and I'm making a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game, to me, this could be the most lucrative game I've ever made. To them, that is a rounding error. I've seen the budgets of video games and cried and thought compared to what budgets I make in tabletop. So you have to check your ego at the door, and you just have to be a good shepherd of that IP and know that you're really making something that is for fans like you. You got excited to go get that license. You're making it for them. It's not about you.
Absolutely. And Jess, I know you've worked with a lot of IP, specifically, historical based.
Right.
You want to talk a little bit about that experience, what that process was like?
Yeah, I think that's there's an interesting overlap there, because when you're creating a game that's based on history, same thing. You need to keep it accurate. You need to be shepherding that theme, the history, into the mechanisms of the game. So, because people are going to go play a game like Lovelace and Babbage, knowing something about this time period, and maybe this is their favorite thing, and they're just really excited to sit down and play this game and have it be accurate. And if you're taking wild liberties with it, then they're going to be disappointed. That player experience is going to fall short because they know what they're used to. And it's tricky to take an IP or some historical period and then make it work. And I definitely, there, Lovelace and Babbage, there's a little bit of like, okay, we're going to put this in and make the analytical engine not as broad as it was in the computer realm that's in this game, but you want to, at least with the history, make sure the characters are accurate. These people were in this time period. This makes sense for what they're doing, that they could do this. So exactly to what Nate said, there's a lot of making sure you're shepherding that period into the game in a clear way that's also going to be fun and enjoyable with the way that board games are played.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is great. And again, I want to give a thank you to our viewers and the comments. Some great stuff there. Corinne Yeager, great question. We're going to circle around to that. But before we do, I'm gonna actually have each person answer this one. What was kind of a favorite project? Try to keep it to one. I know it's hard to pick your favorite child, but what was a real positive experience for you on a project that you worked on? What made that kind of a fave experience? What made that a really positive experience to work on? I'll start with Jesse.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. So there's two different kinds of I'm sorry, I'm already failing. There's two different kinds of really positive experiences that I've had in development. So one was working on Solani with Drake was just phenomenal. He was such an easy designer to work with. He had a clear vision for the game. He took the feedback and did really, really smart things with it. And it made my work as a developer almost feel like I had just become a really, really elaborate critical playtester. I almost didn't need to do very much because Drake was so proactive and active and passionate, but also open-ended and receptive to critical feedback. I've never had such an easy time working with creatives, and creatives are great. Obviously I work in a creative field, but we're challenging.
Absolutely.
And so that was just seamless and beautiful. The other way that projects have been super positive for me is when they let me do that being clever creative thing myself as a developer. So one of the projects I'm super in love with being part of right now is Bloodstone with Skybound. There's so many characters, there's so many bosses, building out the solo modes and helping refine those boss fights that are part of the PvE part of that game system, making it's that asymmetry thing I was gushing about earlier, right? Making all of those unique experiences. I just get absorbed in it. I end up in flow. I'm having so much fun. I forget that this is my job. And so, yeah, so those kinds of things are great for me.
Love it. I love it. Carla, what about you? What's a positive experience been?
I think my most positive experience has been with Geeks Who Drink, who approached me, and they had a simple framework and they wanted to put it in game, trivia party game. So what I first did was I realized, I'm not, into really trivia party games. That's not my wheelhouse. So I reached out to Eric Slauson, who is great at party and trivia games. He is fantastic. And he's one of the reasons why I bring up this project, because it was so fun just to have all these meetings with Eric, where we would just be okay, what are we gonna do? The company was go forth, make something super cool. So we went and we made 12 different games, and we're all okay, so this is this game and it works in this way and it uses a system like this. And it was also really good because the publisher was okay, I hate that idea, don't talk about it ever again. But I like this one little section, so take this section and that section of these different ideas. They were very clear and open. They didn't give half weird answers. So we had a definite direction to go. Every time we had a meeting, and we're okay, let's fix this and make a cohesive, super fun experience. So yeah, Eric is fantastic. I highly recommend him. If you ever need any party trivia, any help, he is a great designer on a lot of things.
I love it. I also love the cat cameos that we're having here. So passing from Carla's cat to Nate's cat.
Nice.
Nate, why don't you tell us? You can tell us about your cat too, but your a positive experience you've had.
Oh, my cat's wonderful. She's 11. You can, if you're on my Christmas card list, you see her every year, drawn by very famous artists. As far as projects, it's funny you talk about Eric. Developing and working with that guy is entertaining because he will bring you 20 ideas, and you have to. This is a great thing. If you're a developer, let me give you this one tip before anything else. Learn to say these two things. I love that idea. Let's keep it for an expansion. I love that, and Daryl laughs because I've said this to him plenty of times. So you got a yes and, but you also got to get a project done. I love that idea. Let's keep it for expansion. Or that's a great idea. I think that could be its own game. Why don't we put that over there, and we'll work on that as a whole project. So just learn to be very nice, but keep your project on moving. I tried to look through the projects I've been on, and I'm sure I'm missing plenty, but I gotta say that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with Kevin Wilson was such a special project to be a part of because it was such a good game. The ideas that he brought to the table were insane for dungeon crawling, and the amount of work that I did on that, while it probably shortened my life, it was also good quality work. From pitching and getting the license to art directing to product managing to developing, I was really touching all levels of that thing, and that'll be a thing that I will never do again, quite intentionally, but also that I'm very proud of. So that would have to be the one.
Awesome. How about yourself, Brenna?
One of mine would probably be Role Player Adventures by Thunderworks Games, which I worked on with John Brieger, another wonderful developer. Role Players just like one of my favorite games in general. So be able to like work in the system that I really love and then bring it to this like totally new, narrative campaign style game was super cool. And the Thunderworks team is just awesome to work with, really receptive to our ideas, but, also giving us like enough structure so we weren't just like free flowing in it. Just like all around really positive experience. Yeah.
Love it. Great example. Jess, any examples?
Yeah, so Lovelace and Babbage is the one I always go to as my favorite. But the reason is actually because it was the most challenging that I've worked on, because it's math the game. So I had to make math fun. And I had to get a lot of people to play test a math game. But that's actually really what I enjoyed about it, because going to these conventions, trying to gather people to play test the game, I would inevitably get women who would be like, oh, you want my husband will come play this game. He's an engineer, but I'm bad at math. And I'd be like, no, I need you to test this game. I need to see how you respond to the game. I need your help. And I would get these families and these women to sit down, and by the end of the game, they would do great. And then they would feel empowered. You could see them be like, oh, I did really good at that. I like this game. And be like, when's the Kickstarter? When are you doing this? So to see changing people's minds, not just about math the game, but about themselves, like, oh, I can math. I'm fine. I'm good at this. That was just really fun for me. So I love that part of it. And then the historical side that I already kind of touched on, trying to cram that all into the mechanisms of the game and make the mechanisms so that the theme shined through it and wasn't just tacked on. That was extremely challenging, but I loved the way that gave me a framework for the development, so that I wasn't just free flowing. I could go and look at the history and take those nuggets of information, go back to the designer and say, okay, so we have this framework. What can we do to make this period of history shine in the game, and not make it feel like it's just tacked on, but like you're there and doing these things. And I think we achieved that. So that's my baby.
Yeah, love it. Brenna, you mentioned John Brigger, who is a very talented developer in his own right. I actually tried to get him to join us as well, but he was busy. But that brings up just the idea of like, what other people, resources, events are out there that have helped you, or that you see are good resources that people could look into to grow and develop as developers?
Yeah, definitely. I'm big big shout out to John. I've worked with him like as a development partner a few times, and he's wonderful. I also like have to plug my husband, Dan May, who's my normal development partner. A lot of people know his illustration work, but he's also a really wonderful game developer in his own right. What I always like to tell people when they're trying to get into development, obviously, to some extent you need to play a lot of games. Like you need to learn the language of games. You need to like learn the references. If a publisher comes to you and they say, we have a Machi Koro weight game, you kind of need to know what that means. You need to know like those touchstones of the industry. But aside from that, I'm such a huge proponent of getting outside of games to get better at development. Like reading a book of poetry or going to see a film or listening to a piece of music or something. I think like that's diversifying, like where you get your inspiration, I think is a really underlooked part of game design and development. So like for me, if I'm working on, like a suspenseful kind of game, I might go watch like a Tarkovsky film and be like, okay, how does this make me feel? And how can I make other people feel like that in the game? For me, like that's a really big part of my process. So I really recommend if you're feeling stuck, like it doesn't do any good to just sit and like fiddle with cubes, like go do something else, like find something else to get inspiration from.
Oh, great advice for all kinds of roles. So great stuff there. Jess, do you have any, resources or people or events that you would point to?
Sure, kind of an encompassing of all of those things. Again, going to all these conventions, I met a lot of great people. And so my advice would be, don't be afraid to ask for help. I was shocked at how many people were so willing to help me and to look at the game. Jonathan Gilmore, Isaac Childress, I just met them, had the game and was like, oh, I'm playtesting this little thing. And they were super willing to sit down and playtest it and look at it. Some of them actually said, I'm just glad to look at anything that's not my game. Like, I'm happy to not be playing my game right now. Sure, let's sit down and look at this. So people were very, very open to helping other developers. And then reaching out to things like there's Facebook groups and lots of things online these days, especially after this past year and a half, where you can play with people on Tabletopia or TTS and show them the game and get feedback there. So whether it's people that are already in the industry and have knowledge that way, or just people who are gamers, play a lot of games, or even content creators, if you ask, they're usually really excited to kind of see behind the scenes and do the process with you.
Absolutely. Great stuff. I don't want to run out of time without getting to some of the great questions that we got sent in. So we're going to highlight a few of them. Sorry, we won't get to all of them, but I did promise Jay Bell that we get to his question. He was our first question, so I really appreciated it. And it's something that I was curious about. So Jesse, do you want to jump into this? I'll read the question though for anyone. Maybe there's some people that are just listening, not necessarily watching. But Jay Bell's asking, I'd love to know if there are things that you love for designers to do and not do. So he's saying, what he means is, this is great and makes my job so much easier. You even made that comment just earlier, Jesse. So what do designers do right or wrong, right, and how could that relationship get better?
Yeah, so the big way that I think that the biggest thing that makes a developer-designer relationship for me easy is when designers understand that nothing is personal. None of the changes that are being made are in any ways a reflection on their abilities as a designer or their ideas. I am fundamentally focused on the product, the marketing, and the experience being appropriate for as wide of a target audience as we can make it, given the publisher's considerations. That said, what can designers do to help with that? I think coming into the process knowing what your vision was or is for that game, and knowing where your darlings are. That is to say, the parts of the game that are, as Carla has referred to, your babies, those like really precious elements that you have a lot of attachment to. Knowing what those are and being able to flag those for me can help me to make sure that I treat them with care and respect when I inevitably alter them and change them and make them different from what they were in the first place, so that the game can be refined into what it needs to be to succeed in whatever market space it's moving into. So yeah, that's my.
Awesome. Great stuff. All right. Well, another question that we have, and again, I'm just going to kind of put people on the spot here with our questions, but we have a very talented group here. Corinne Yeager asked, as developers, do you have genres of games you feel are more or less in your wheelhouse? Have you ever turned down work for a game, and what are the reasons? And I'm going to put each of us on the spot for this one, because I feel like we each could kind of answer this. And so I'll start off with Nate, and we'll go from there. But what are some of your wheelhouse spots that you think you're especially good at as a developer? And if you want to answer the other question of turning down work, what are some of the reasons there? It's kind of two questions there.
Yeah, I mean, I have learned from my space that I want to work on games that have one big thing that pops versus a bunch of concentric patterns that all kind of go together and make an experience. So for me, I want to look for something like a Monstrosity that has that that quick element of you're going to draw something you're not looking at, or you're going to describe something you're not looking at. Like, I want that one marketable piece. I've done enough work on big games that I don't feel my impact on making a bunch of trains run on time is as meaningful as making one train look like a bullet train. So I'm going to pass on work that doesn't let me help things shine.
Great. Brenna, how about yourself?
In terms of genres that I think are more in my wheelhouse, I personally really love like highly thematic games. So I think that's probably one of my strengths, is really getting the theme and the mechanics to marry up. In terms of turning down work, I like, as a gamer, my tastes are pretty eclectic. Like, I think thematic games may be my favorite, but I enjoy and appreciate a lot of different genres. The only times I would really turn down work for like content reasons are if I don't think it's a game that can ultimately be successful. So we talked a little bit about how marketing really should start at design. And if I feel like it's a game that's just a mismatch for the market, I probably won't take it on. But that's not usually related to the genre, though.
Absolutely. Carla, what's your wheelhouse? What are some of the genres you feel like you connect best with?
I really like, I worked a lot on like light to medium games, lots of different genres, but like I brought up earlier with the party trivia game, like that's not what I do like a lot of, or like really mainstream games. So like if there's ever any time where it's like, well, like if somebody was like, hey, Carla, can you develop this super heavy war game? I'd be like, sure, but also I will get this other person that will, help out, and that's kind of their genre. Like I will bring other people to the team that can help out a lot more, and like that is their wheelhouse. So I don't think I'd ever turn anything down for like a specific reason like that, just because it's just so interesting. Like from my perspective, like I can bring in a lot. Like even though something isn't in my wheelhouse, and I could like lower the cognitive load, and I just know things about games, and they're just like, I love learning. So even if I give most of the work to somebody else, I still get to be part of the process and learn and help out in the ways that I can.
Love it. Jesse?
Yeah, so to be a broken record, give me asymmetry. Like at any level, whether it's like player asymmetry or whether it's like a campaign game that's got scenario asymmetry, just give me ways to make the same system provide distinct experiences at different moments around the table, and I'm going to be in love with the project. As for turning down projects, I think the only reason I've ever turned down a project is because I just don't have time. I just don't have time or bandwidth. I'm willing to, like, for similar reasons to what Carla said. If a client and I agree that I would be a good fit for the project in one way or another, and I lack expertise or experience, I'll just grow the team. I'll find somebody that's got that expertise or experience, and I will give it a shot. because it's always an opportunity to learn something new, whether it's war games or heavyweight Euros or anything else that I haven't yet had a chance to work on.
Love it. And Jess.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that a lot. Everything here I feel like is an opportunity to learn. But if there's a genre I'm drawn to more, it's definitely medium to heavyweight games. I really like to dive into that strategy of decision making and multiple paths to victory, and maybe it makes your head bleed just a little bit. And often that's my tendency or what I bring to a team. So same as what everyone here has said, if I am going to have a lighter game, then I'm going to work with somebody that's going to focus more on the experience for that lighter game and then work together with them. But for me, I'm really looking for the team. Who is the team working on it? I prefer to work team-based. I like bouncing ideas off others. So who is that? And if I'm going to say no to a project, it's usually because I'm too busy. Just like Jesse said, we're so far out at this point that, yeah, it's usually just nothing against the project, more that I have no time.
Yeah, time is a difficult thing sometimes. There's a lot of good projects to work on. And talking about time, we have run out of time. So we have to give our goodbyes. I want to give each of you an opportunity to plug kind of some projects you're working on or your services, and also please share your social media so people can reach out. I am confident in saying each of these people would love to interact with you if you have more questions, comments, opportunities. If you're looking for a developer, no better group of 5 developers right here. If you need a quote, please reach out to these people. Give them opportunities to make your games better. Brenna, do you want to start us off, and then we'll work clockwise-ish, I think.
Yeah, sure. So you can definitely check out my company, Quill Studio. We're basically like a one-stop shop for publishers. So they drop a prototype off with us, and a few months later, we bring back a totally finished product. So that's kind of what we do. So if you need anything along the lifeline of a game, we can probably provide that to you. In terms of projects, I have 2 games that I developed that are in the late pledge stage right now. That's Role Player Adventures by Thunderworks Games and Agents of Smersh Epic Edition by Everything Epic Games. So definitely go check those out if you're interested in narrative campaign games. And you can find me mostly on Twitter at Brenna Noonan, just my name down at the bottom there. And you can also find Quillsilver at BY Quillsilver. Should have a few projects getting announced into the summer and fall. So following us there, you'll be able to hear about them.
Amazing. Nate, why don't you give us the plug and also tell us a little bit. We never got into cut.com, so tell us about that.
Cut.com makes great party games. You can go there. I'll use that as my plug. Watch some of the videos. They're timely and interesting content. What else we're saying? Thanks for having me. Follow Eric Slauson on Twitter at Slauson Designs, at Slauson Designs. Buy Monstrosity and hire all of these people for their various services. I'm going to jump all of you in the line though and DM them as soon as it's out.
There you go. Eric didn't know this was actually just a giant panel of endorsing him. Yeah. So following that up, passing to Carla, who was singing his praises, why don't you plug some of your projects going on and your services and how people can find you?
So my next project that's going on Kickstarter is Wicked and Wise by Fortessa Elise, who is also an amazing designer that I've really enjoyed working with. And it's an asymmetric trick-taking team game, which is very weird on a couple layers. So you can find out more about me and my services at weirddraftgames.com/Carla, and I have a blog and all those things, and I'm on Twitter at WeirdDrafts. But yeah, Eric is fantastic. Know him.
Love it. All right, Jesse.
Yeah, so I feel like I should start by saying I have also worked with Eric, and I haven't plugged him yet, but he's really fun to work with. I agree. And in terms of an actual plug, my current primary development project is Rat Queens with Deepwater Games, which is coming up on Kickstarter very, very soon. It's a super cool comic intellectual property, and it's a super fun cooperative game, so definitely check that out. On Twitter, I am at TT Void. I check it once a week, maybe. So feel free to send me a message over that. I will get to it eventually. The other way to reach me is through the Meeple Syrup Facebook group. So that's MEEPLE Syrup, SYRUP. So if you join that community, that's the easiest way to get access to me. Or send me a message on Twitter, but be patient.
Love it. And last but not least, Jess, how can people find you, and what stuff are you working on?
So the next project coming up is Semaramit. It's actually from Ion Game Design, and it's a historical game about the female Assyrian leader of she was this leader of Syria in 800 BC approximately. So again, that framework of history and making that a board game. So that'll be in Kickstarter this fall, and that has been an amazing project to work on. So I'm looking forward to that. You can find me on Board Game Girl across social media. So that's me. And I do Cassidy Consulting for development and international marketing direction.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, again, thank you each for being part of this. My name's Daryl Andrews. You can find me on social media just by looking for my name. Usually there's a middle initial in there with an M, so it looks like Daryl Mandrews. But yeah, you can find me. We all love talking about games, and please keep making amazing games. If you're interested in development, try it out. Like Nate said, find some opportunities where you can get involved and grow those skills and put in the hours. Each of the people here has put in more than the hours necessary to become quite talented, and that's the only way you can really do it. So thank you for sharing that wisdom and experience that you have, and hope everyone has a great day. So bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.